Well, let me see. Good afternoon, everybody. We're gonna start with the new virtual dialogue. This is the fourth virtual dialogue that we organized so far with the Center for Latin American Studies at the University of Arizona, with the support of Asuntos del Sur and the Confluence Center for Creative Inquiry at the University of Arizona. This time we're organizing with the Universidad ORT in Uruguay, and we'll be addressing the discussion of the important changes in drug policies in the region. We have called this dialogue the From Repression to Regulation in Drug Policies in Latin America. We have 4 speakers this time. We have Marcela Vasquez here in Arizona. She's associate professor in anthropology at the University of Arizona and holds both a PhD in anthropology and MS in agricultural economics. She specialized in environmental anthropology, political ecology, environmental justice, and interrelation between human agency and large-scale structures. We also have from Chile, Eduardo Vergara, who is a founding director at Asuntos del Sur, and he is the director of the Latin American Drug Policy Observatory that is based in the same institution. He publishes widely on drug policy in Latin America, and he launched a book, co-authored a book called From Repression to Regulation, that actually we took the title for this conference. From Uruguay, we have our colleagues from Universidad ORT and Universidad de la República. Pedro Isern is a current professor of Universidad ORT in Uruguay with an MA from the London School of Economics and Political Science. He's currently editor of Letras Internacionales, a weekly examination of international politics and events in the region. Currently, he is an economic history PhD candidate. We also have Clara Musto in Uruguay, who is a member of Uruguayan NGO Pro-Derechos, Pro-Rights, and works on marijuana-related policies. She's currently an Erasmus Mundus scholar pursuing her PhD in criminology at the University of Kent and University of Utrecht in Europe. She's participating in policy change in the Uruguayan marijuana market. Without more introduction, we're going to start first here with Professor Vasquez from the United States. Then we're going to move the discussion to Eduardo Vergara in Chile, and then to Uruguay. So we're going to start with Professor Vasquez.
Can we get the PowerPoint up? Yeah. Okay, but it doesn't have to be right now. Hello everyone. I'm glad to be sitting with you guys.
No, it's fine, it's fine. Why? No, we don't need it. Okay, sure.
So,
no sound. No, none of no sound. Okay.
I think I prepared a lot more than the time I have, so I'm going to go very quickly through what I've prepared. And I'm going to talk about the drug war in Colombia and the impact of U.S. military support through Plan Colombia. I think Colombia has been the victim of this war on drugs for almost 30 years, and I think we have a lot of lessons to learn. Who has benefited and who has lost? How has success been defined, and how is it that it became the model to follow for the Merida initiative in Mexico? I am not going to answer all these questions, but I think these are questions that should be posed in this dialogue, as part of this dialogue. First, I want to highlight some of the contradictions that frame U.S. military support in Colombia. both today and in Colombia's recent past. After all, the United States military has played a key role since the Cold War in advancing and pressuring the various Colombian governments, and in providing a great deal of military support, mostly in the forms of training and weapons. I was going to talk about counterinsurgency, so I'm briefly going to summarize that the U.S. has been very involved in Colombia since, since the 1960s. In fact, it was the attack on a peasant commune in the southern part of the country, which resulted in the formation of the Revolutionary Armed Forces in Colombia, the FARC. This was about 50 years ago, and the FARC are still around, much weaker organization today, but the fact that there are the government is currently in efforts to sign peace negotiations with the FARC means that it is still a relevant organization. I argue that it is still around because instead of addressing issues of social and economic justice, of impunity and civilian governance, for decades the Colombian government has opted for military intervention. This not only applies to the FARC, but it also applies to narcotraffic. With the end of the Cold War in the 1980s, the war on drugs became the justification for continued and enhanced military intervention. By 1991, Colombia topped El Salvador as Latin America's largest recipient of military and police assistance, with most of the aid going to police for drug interdiction and aerial fumigation of illegal crops, particularly in the Amazon region. In 1998, during the presidency of Pastrana, how do I do the PowerPoint? You see the beginning of Plan Colombia. Basically, it was designed
Not open.
to...
You close it?
No. Basically, Plan Colombia was designed as a drug eradication strategy, mostly through fumigation of Roundup SL, which is a highly toxic version of Roundup produced by the Monsanto Corporation. So for the past, since the 92, 94, Colombia has been fumigating in an effort to eradicate the production of coca. And it has become the core of the U.S. military sanctions strategy. These fumigations have been conducted by private contractors that don't necessarily answer to U.S. Congress. So they are highly problematic. This is not working.
Why?
I don't know. Oh, I'm doing this. Everybody can see it? But nobody can see it here?
They're gonna see with the delay. So that's the problem.
Okay.
The people on YouTube will listen to it perfectly.
Oh, all right. So anyway, Plan Colombia, with Plan Colombia, the Colombian military became the primary beneficiary of U.S. military aid and training, and Colombia the largest recipient of U.S. military aid outside of the Middle East. I am showing now a graph that shows the amount of money that came in the early years. From 2000 to 2001, Colombia received $1.165 billion in military aid from the U.S. 80% of it went into the military. From 2000 to 2014, Colombia has received $9.3 billion in military aid from the U.S., mostly military aid. Some of it has gone into economic assistance, but, well, you can't see the graph, but I'm showing a graph that shows the difference.
You can show the graph.
Here's the graph. The blue part is the part that is military and police assistance. The green part refers to economic and institutional assistance. This is a huge amount of money, $9.3 billion of your tax-paying dollars. So the fair question to ask is, after all that money and all that fumigation that of course has had tremendous environmental and health repercussions that I don't have time to go into it, the fair question to ask is, has coca cultivation stopped? Has eradication worked? And this is another graph where I show the red line is fumigation from 1994 to 2012. The blue line is manual eradication, and the green line refers to remaining coca cultivation. So
that doesn't change the communication, so you can see.
Okay. So I need to see it. Well, so as you can see, you know, the green line, coca cultivation is higher today, slightly higher than when Plan Colombia started. So has it been a success from that perspective? I don't think so, although the U.S. government has deemed it a success, so much so that it is trying to do the same thing in, am I almost finished? Anyway, time. Yeah. Long-term health impacts, environmental impacts, you can look them up and you'll find them everywhere, so I'm not going to go into that. The next important question to ask is, given that the amount of assistance that the Colombian government, that the Colombian military has received, the fair question to ask is, what is the record of the Colombian military? And you could ask the same thing of the Mexican military today. I'm just going to give you a few examples. Besides fumigating, the military has been responsible, directly responsible, for a series of human rights abuses. I'm just going to give you one example. Many Colombians have seen the way the military operates. So on the one hand, when you talk about on the terrorism front, the military has really not dealt with the paramilitary groups that control a large amount of cocaine trafficking in Colombia. Basically, paramilitary groups have been able to function without much intervention from the military. On the other hand, in terms of the guerrilla, there has been a number of human rights abuses that have been clearly documented. In 2008, for example, stories became public that the Colombian soldiers had detained civilians, sometimes taking them far away, executed them, and then claimed them as guerrilla killed in combat. These were known as the false positives. While cases of false positives date back at least to the 1990s, the number of reports exploded from 2004 to 2008, becoming widespread and systematic, according to Philip Alston, who is the United Nations Specialty Rapporteur on extrajudicial executions. At the time, Santos, who is our current president, was Minister of Defense. Human rights organizations in 2008 reported more than 3,000 cases of executions by the military, many of them carried out this way. So there's, you know, this, if you want more information on this, I can provide. Success then has come at a high price. The impact, and here it's a map that shows extrajudicial executions. According to the Fellowship for Reconciliation, extrajudicial killings increased on average in areas after the United States increased military assistance to units in those areas. So I would say, to wrap up, Colombia can be indeed considered a human rights catastrophe. It is still the highest producer of coca in Latin America, or in the Andean region. Colombia has the highest displaced population in the world, 5.2 million people out of a total of 47 million people. And a lot of displacement has had to do not only with violence, but with fumigation, which is, of course, a form of violence. So these wars, in the last instance, it would appear as if the war on drugs, like the war on terror, are not designed to rid the hemisphere of drugs, terrorists, or communists, but to maintain a neoliberal colonial order that is based on uneven economic globalization. These wars are good for military business, good for banks in the U.S. and elsewhere, and I haven't talked about how banks benefit from money laundering, good for private prisons, good for the Monsanto Corporation, and provide the justification to force entire populations out of regions where there are valuable natural resources, or to target social movements that demand social justice and political accountability from the state. Did I run out of time, or can I
Yes,
say?
you're right.
Okay.
You can
One more thing. The U.S., of course, as you probably all know, well, you can't see these anyway. Some cartoons that show how the U.S. has been emphasizing supply. It is the fault of the South that the U.S. has problems. Demand, however, continues to rise for many of these illegal drugs. So demand has really had very little impact on the demand side. And I finally want to end with a quote from a professor of the Universidad Nacional who spoke at a United Nations forum on illicit drugs in the Guaviare region. The Guaviare region has been the hardest hit in terms of military intervention. And he said, they want the state to return their children, referring to the people in the Guaviare. They want the state to return their children, their relatives, their neighbors, their wives, confined in ignominious prisons, treated not as peasants, indigenous, or Afro-descendants, as human beings, but as criminals and delinquents for seeking to survive in a world without opportunity. They want the return of their families, planting cocoa, rubber, aloe, yucca, bananas, rice, rounding up cattle, blah, 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 blah. They want them at their side to build bridges and paths to development and well-being. They want the money used for glyphosate in fumigation and forced eradication made into schools, health clinics, productive projects, life plans.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vasquez. Now we're going to have the presentation of Eduardo Vergara from Santiago, Chile. Eduardo, all yours.
All right, I'm on. Well, first of all, I really want to thank Matias. Matias, you're doing a great job. Can you hear me?
Micrófono, por favor. Eduardo, pon el micrófono.
It's on?
Está en mute.
No. Is it?
No, this should be fine. No, the sound is never delayed. That is delayed.
Can you hear me? Hold on. There? Can you hear me now?
Beautiful.
All right. You were totally muting me. So, hey, first of all, I was saying I was very inspired, telling everyone that I really want to thank you for the effort. I think that you're doing a great effort of getting different people together to talk about an issue that definitely needs more time. It needs more evidence. It needs we need more debates, and certainly that we need to engage not only Latin American countries but also the U.S. The U.S. is a crucial actor, not only in terms of the amount of influence it has on national policies all over Latin America, but also in terms of the power it has over the United Nations. So a crucial actor, great place you're in. Arizona is the place to be. So I'm very glad you got us together. So first of all, I want to say that in Latin America we have an addiction to punitive and repressive policies. Progressives in general, we've done an extremely bad job coming up with solutions to security issues in general. We've done a bad job coming forward with proposals to move away from repression and prohibition as the only way to move forward. So I think that that's the first point that we need to take. We have not done a good job. It is true that Latin America is leading the way on drug policy reform right now, yes, but we still have a long ways to go. The point is, repression and prohibition work very good with public opinion. It provides a good tool for electoral battles. It's simple to come out on TV and talk about the end of tolerance. It's easy to come up with promises that speak about a world free of drugs. And it's easy to say, hey, I don't want your kids to do drugs, so we're going to prohibit things. It's the easy way to move forward. There's a lot of ideological taboos. There is a lack of serious debate. I'm not a big fan of extreme debates or points of view that pretty much talk about conspiracy theories. I think that a point, and in specific countries, the problem is much simpler than what we think. It has to do with supply and demand. It has to do with a large demand coming from our citizens to do drugs. Nice people do drugs. I mean, it's not bad to do drugs. I think that we need to move away from taboos. We need to move away from black and white, and we need to move away from thinking that someone is chasing us, and that the reason why prohibition is working and the reason why these policies are being funded and other countries are jumping into other countries' policies is because something larger. Sometimes it's extremely simple, and I think that we need to have the wisdom to make that difference. And because of that, drug users have become a very easy target. They become an enemy, a public enemy that someone needs to defeat. It's easy to target drug users. It's easy to target drugs in general, and it's quite easy to detain and put them to jail compared to what real bad people are doing. So we have a really bad mix of policies that work in front of public opinion, policies that are easy to execute, but also about a profile of a drug user that it's really easy to target. They say that people with beards and that they smoke weed and they're bad, and some countries have worked for years making this wrong relationship between drug use and crime. In countries we've seen for years many political ads or even governmental campaigns talking about kids that because they've done cocaine or they've smoked pot, they're gonna go and rob a bank or the corner store. So all those elements have made this issue extremely complex. And in a way, because of that, the elements that I just spoke about, drug laws have become an extremely powerful and useful tool for control. The main, the people that are mainly affected by drug laws are the poor or people with from the the lower classes with low income, young people. In countries like Chile, 56% of people detained under drug laws are under 29, and women in general, not only for drug use but mainly for small-scale trafficking. In countries like Ecuador, there are certain detention centers or jails where more than 90% of the people detained there are there because they violated drug laws. The numbers in Argentina speak of 70%. In a country like Chile with lower numbers in terms of proportion, the numbers still are over half, over 50%. So we're crowding our jails with drug users or with small-scale sellers, not with big cartel leaders or not with the big narcos that we love to talk about. We are hitting the wrong people. The cost of this drug war, the cost of chasing pot smokers, the cost of putting women behind bars is extremely high. Not only in terms of the money we're wasting, but also in terms of the impact that those policies are having over society. Think about the fact that you are chasing down a woman who's selling crack on the corner, who's selling cocaine or even marijuana on the corner, who's making no more than $300, $400 a month. You're putting her behind bars. Most likely, her kids or her husband, her family is going to pick up the business. you are having an effect that it's you're multiplying the problem. And these kids are going to pick up their job because they need the money to bring it home. And some of them are going to start using drugs, and they might become addicted. So it's a very complex scenario. But what I'm trying to say here is that, again, we're targeting the wrong people. We've seen, you know, a few countries like Uruguay. President Mujica said, you know, someone had to be the first. He knew that some other leaders didn't have the courage to move forward and change drug policy, and he was wise enough to say, I'll do it. Some countries might follow. You are in a country right now, Matias, where 2 states have voted democratically for cannabis regulation. And regulation is not a liberal, free hippie world wacko policy. It's about putting laws. It's about knowing what the limits are. It's about making people accountable. It's about making people responsible. It's about saying you can do it, but you can do it on certain rules. You can do it here and not there. You can do it at your house with your friends, but don't smoke and drive. That's what regulation is all about. The rest is allowing the wrong people lead the business. The rest is allowing, you know, the narcos sell drug to kids in the street. It's allowing college students selling other college students drugs. I'm pretty sure that at the U of A and in many universities around the world, I don't want to say all of them, but I could say all of them, you can find any type of drugs so easily, and it comes from your classmate, and it's on the soccer field, and it's after, before, and during school. It's extremely easy to get drugs, but you don't want the wrong people selling drugs, and that's why we want to regulate them, because we want people to know what they're using, how they're using them, and what the effects of using drugs are going to be. That's what regulation is all about. We need to reform drug policies. Yes, a few countries are leading the way. They are, and what we need to move forward is it's to look for responsible regulation. Each country needs to look into their own policies, into their own history, and develop different policies. We don't want another Washington consensus on drug policy. What we're having right now, as of today, it has been a Washington consensus on drug policy. One policy fits all, and it has been an extreme failure. We have target some countries as user countries, or as transit countries, or as producing countries, and those policies have failed. I think it's a good time in terms of all the ones that we're working on drug policy. It's a time to celebrate. I think that Uruguay, it's leading the way, and some other countries are understanding that it's the time to reform, to put evidence on top of the table. As I said at the beginning of my presentation, there's a wrong idea of many concepts and issues that we're looking into, and it's really easy to believe that there is a conspiracy about everything. But I think that what we need to do sometimes is stop, take a step back, and understand that each country needs to develop its own policies. What I believe is not only cannabis regulation. I believe in the regulation of most drugs. I believe cocaine needs to be regulated, and we need to develop a system for people to go and buy cocaine on specific places, and they have the right to know what kind of cocaine they're buying, what the effects are going to be. They also need to know where that cocaine is coming from, how it's made. In some Latin American countries, street cocaine has lower than 5 and 4% percentage of purity. People are not using cocaine. They think they're using cocaine. Heroin, it's also an issue. It's an issue more in the U.S., but we're seeing countries like Colombia and even Mexico where these drugs are showing up. And there's no regulation. They're not. I mean, we're going crazy about marijuana, and we're not even thinking about other drugs. And we need to regulate them as well. When we achieve that point of understanding that having clear rules is the way to go, we also need to begin thinking about other parts of this debate, and this is perhaps something that it might come up later, but we also need to think, what are we going to do with people that are used to sell drugs and they make a life out of selling drugs. Think about the example, we were talking about Colombia a few minutes ago, but well, let's talk about illegal mining in Colombia. I mean, people tend to move from one illegal activity to the other one. It's because that's the way they can get a decent income. They're not going to go from selling drugs in the corner to take a minimum wage job in Latin America making $100 when they were making $200 or $300. Look at Mexico. People are stealing oil. In other countries, they move from selling drugs to kidnapping, or they might even do both. We need to start thinking about what's next, what's after we regulate drugs. There's a lot of people thinking about reforming drug laws, but not enough thinking about what comes next. And I believe that, I mean, that being said, I think that, again, it's a good time to debate about drugs. It's regulation. I believe it's the way to go, but country by country, each country will find its own model. We don't need to look into Amsterdam to get answers. We don't need to look only into Portugal to get answers. We don't only need to look into Uruguay to look for answers, but I think that a large debate, right, the kind of debate that we're having right now, it's the way to the future. I don't know if I should say anything else. I would like to hear, questions and a little bit of debate, but I think that was my idea, was to have a small introduction of how we're moving forward, where we're going, and the importance of having a serious and pragmatic but rigorous debate as well.
Thank you, Eduardo, for your presentation. I'm pretty sure we're going to have questions following up. I especially would like to know what is happening in the regional forums discussing these issues. But now we're going to Uruguay. We're going to hear the presentations of Pedro, Isern, and Clara Musto. Guys, are you there?
Very much indeed. Well, thank you very much, Matias, for the opportunity to be involved in the organization of this conference. I will try to give you an institutional approach to the Uruguayan experience. First, a brief introduction to the country. Uruguay is a country that had a long bipartisan tradition until the last decade of the 20th century. Both the National and Red Party were the classical expression of what we political scientists call catch-all parties.
Can you talk to the microphone at a good distance, but you need to be closer?
Okay. I'll give an institutional approach to the Uruguayan experience. First, a brief introduction to the country, to Uruguay. Uruguay is a country that had a long bipartisan tradition until the last decade of the 20th century. Both the National and Red Party were the classical expression of what we call catch-all parties. A structural change occurred in the 1995 general election when the left-wing coalition founded in 1971, Frente Amplio or Wide Front, increasingly became a center-left coalition with real aspirations to reach power. The Wide Front, or Frente Amplio, finally came into power in 2005 after Uruguay suffered its worst economic crisis in history. The The center-left coalition won the second consecutive general election in 2010, and the well-known former guerrilla leader José Pepe Mujica became president. After becoming the main political actor, the White Front structurally changed the logic of the political system, the Uruguayan political system. When we discuss the long-term viability of any public policy, such as the depenalization of cannabis, we have to keep in mind the future potential performance, both of the White Front in the opposition, as well as the traditional parties in power, the traditional, the National and Red Party, the future potential in power. Indeed, although Uruguay is well known for having a solid political system, a key element is still missing. The White Front has never been in the opposition after being in power. Then we don't have enough information about the front's cooperative behavior in opposition. I think it is a critical topic. We can see a great improvement in the front's performance, in the Frente Amplio performance from the 1985 presidential election to the present. I don't know if you can watch it right now, the impressive improvement until reaching power in 2005. You know? And winning the election again 5 years ago, in 2010. Latin America is essentially a diverse region where the main point in common is underdevelopment. It is not possible to talk about a uniform Latin America. Following the Human Development Index published by the United Nations, there are countries with very high human development, Chile and Argentina, high human development like Uruguay, Cuba, Costa Rica, Panama, and others, Brazil, Mexico. Medium human development, Paraguay, Bolivia, El Salvador, and others, and low human development, which is Haiti. No? Furthermore, there are countries with strong institutions, Chile, Uruguay, Costa Rica. Countries with middle quality institutions, Colombia, Brazil, Panama, and countries with weak institutions, Mexico, Argentina, Ecuador, Venezuela, and countries with very weak institutions, Haiti, Nicaragua, Honduras. Why is it troublesome to talk about the sole Latin American drug policy? Again, why is it troublesome to talk about the sole Latin American drug policy? First, it is important to highlight the common mistake. If a country is unable to efficiently fight drug trafficking because of poor institutions, Mexico may be one of the best current examples, then it might be difficult or impossible to implement an efficient and fair depenalization and regulation policy. Again, if a country is unable to efficiently fight drug trafficking because of poor institutions, it may be difficult or impossible to implement an efficient and fair depenalization and regulation policy. If you lack good institutions to implement prohibition, you also may lack good institutions to implement an efficient regulatory policy. As a result, it probably means that a specific policy implemented in one country, for instance, Uruguay, is inapplicable in Mexico. Indeed, Latin America as a concept is too broad and vague. It includes a group of countries and regions that in many cases have little in common. For example, it is clear, as I mentioned, that the north of Mexico has few points in common with the Uruguayan society or the Argentinian society. Then in this context, it is important to discuss the Uruguayan experience in comparative perspective. We have chosen Mexico, both because it is a main actor in the failed war against drugs, and because it is so different from Uruguay, as I just mentioned. Uruguay is a small and very predictable country with good political institutions, and to a certain extent, it is literally the opposite to Mexico. No, that is, it is geographically far from the U.S., small, homogeneous, and with low levels of corruption. I don't know if you can see some comparative indicators between Mexico and Uruguay. We can compare the following institutional and social indicators. PPP per capita, per capita income in PPP terms, 18,000 in Uruguay versus 15,800 in in Mexico. The Gini coefficient, life expectancy, homicide rate, prison population rate, where the difference is very important, 3.5 million in Uruguay, 122 in Mexico. Median age, which is a very important topic when we talk and we think about long-term public policies. And then I wanted to show you some maybe well-known institutional indicators, like the rule of law index, the control of corruption index in Uruguay, Mexico, and an average of Latin America. No? And the more, as we could suspect, Mexico's worst comparative performance is related to political stability. I'd like to make a note on the political economy of the implementation process. No? To talk about this, we can introduce a well-known concept, which is only Nixon goes to China. As a political metaphor, it refers to the ability of a politician with an unquestionable reputation among his supporters for representing and defending their values, to take action that would draw their criticism and even opposition if taken by someone without those credentials. And I'm thinking about the role of the opposition parties in implementing long-term drug policy regulation. Again, the question remains, how would the wide front of Frente Amplio in Uruguay, which is the center-left coalition that governs, react if it happens to lose power? No? That is, how solid Uruguay, also aware, how solid is the relationship among the main political parties in different countries. The end of repression and the incipient beginning of regulation is a matter both of those temporarily in power and those temporarily in opposition. When people trade, they are not only exchanging goods and services, but they are also mainly exchanging institutions. As we know, institution is a much abused concept. For example, when Chile exports copper to China, Chile is not only selling a good and receiving dollars or hard currency. Chile is also importing Chinese institutions. That is unfair or poor quality institutions. This is a critical, crucial, underestimated consequence of the last decade's economic miracle in emerging markets and emerging countries, such as Latin American countries. No? Indeed, we all the time we measured the impressive rate of economic growth, but we have not measured the welfare cost of the connected institutional weakness. I'm sorry. For example, when you introduce depenalization, you have to deal with a new social actor, namely all those powerful or relatively powerful people who are involved in drug trafficking. Again, we take Mexico as a relevant example. It seems to be troublesome to understand how the current bureaucracy will deal efficiently with the hypothetical regulation process, as well as with the attempt of the former drug traffickers to capture and boycott the implementation process. A note on this post-liberal world where we are approaching. As we mentioned, the rule of law is deteriorating across the globe. China, Russia, Indonesia, and many emerging countries poses an increasing share of the world economy, and consequently, the world possesses a decreasing level of rule of law. And the main question refers there and here in Latin America to a real state, the true state of the rule of law. After a decade of economic growth, as I mentioned, is it true that we have better institutions? Clearly no. What has been the relationship between economic growth and rule of law? If it is true that there has been an inverse relationship between economic prosperity and institutional strength, then, ceteris paribus, a more prosperous society consumes more drugs, and that occurs in an increasingly weaker institutional environment. In summarizing, the potential success of the depenalization policy in Uruguay should be carefully evaluated by activists and political leaders in Latin America before attempting in their country. The repression policies implemented in Mexico, Colombia, and other countries have failed dramatically. Although it is essential to change the drug policy in most of Latin America, the whole Latin America, it is probably more important to first consider the quality of the democracies and the quality of rule of law in each country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pedro. Now, Clara, now you're going to be presenting specifically what is happening in Uruguay, right?
Yes. Thank you, Matias, for the invitation. I'm trying to... Okay. Perfect. Okay, my idea here is trying to
just 10 seconds.
Yes. Is everything all right there?
Matias, are you there? Matias? Matias?
Yeah.
We can hear you. Everything is fine.
Okay, okay, perfect. Thank you.
And share
Okay.
the PowerPoint note there. Beautiful.
Perfect. Perfect. So my idea is trying to give to you at least some notion about the big picture about marijuana regulation in Uruguay. Why and how it was possible such an innovative action. Okay. So my plan is trying start by saying a few words about the theoretical and methodological basis of my presentation to give you an idea of why or the inputs of this presentation. Then trying to set the film just by adding a few words about the contextualization of this law. And then going to the core of the presentation about the general idea is that we can better understand why this was possible, why we now are trying to regulate the marijuana market, thinking about this political process as a movement in 3 acts. A first act, where the demand grows and maturates. A second act, when the executive power erupts in the debate. And a third stage, when different actors try to link the streams and finally build the law, the new law. And then trying to finish with some reflection about if we are trying to answer this question, right? If we are moving from repression to regulation, and what are the main challenges for that in our country. So, as Matthias already said, I have been involved in this movement for the reform of the drug policy in Uruguay since 2006. And so I have participated in many conferences or in a number of conference meetings with the government, with other social activists. I work in this subject from the academy, but also as an activist. I participated in many public parades about it. So that's kind of out of my experience is that's an important input for the ideas that I will present in a minute. And also, I'm right now doing a PhD on this subject. And what I'm presenting to you is my general hypothesis. So, as I said, I will try to give you the big picture. We can spend a whole presentation in each one of these stages, but hopefully 30 seconds will be good. And I want you to bear in mind 3 rather basic or intuitive theoretical notions that I think are useful to understand this process. And the first one is that many times political development is defined or punctuated by critical moments that came out of intersecting trajectories with independent temporalities. So we have here demographical trends that works very slow. We have here conjunctural events, political windows, and all these different trajectories and events work together in some point and crystallize in this new will. The second idea is that political decision-making is much more complex, less linear, and less rational than many people assume, and involves far more actors than politicians alone. Sometimes it's easy to get the feeling that people tend to think that the whole idea of marijuana regulation started with Mujica, and in 2012 with the presentation of the Strategy for Life and Coexistence. And we can, I want to discuss that and try to show you how the setting of the agenda, for example, started a few years before. And the third idea is that these different stages in the political process, agenda setting, problem formation, how we define the problem with marijuana use and commerce, defines the type of policy that we need to deliver to solve that problem, and that these stages are also important for the implementation phase. So that is the reflection at the end of the presentation is about that, about the consequences of this particular political process for the implementation of the policy. So as you, my colleagues already discussed, we are starting to feel that we are reaching some kind of tipping point at the international level about drug policy, and it's easy to see how the consensus about prohibition as the only lenses to see drug policy is now broken. Latin America is having a leading role in that debate, and as Eduardo said, Mujica came in this scenario with the courage maybe to say, okay, somebody has to be the first. And in this discussion, the human right violations are very important. Secondly, I want to add a new factor or a process into this contextualization that I think that is not well problematized, maybe, and conceptualized, and is that Uruguay also is a very secularized country, and in particular in the last 10 years, along with Chile, is going through an important secularization process. This is important because at the first moment of the political process, the demand for marijuana is, I think that we can better understand this process if we don't think in marijuana in an isolated way. Because Uruguay passed another laws that are in some way similar because are progressive in a social level. As for example, the legalization of abortion, or a set of laws regarding sexual diversity, gay marriage, etc. These laws are similar not only in their content, but also in the social support. And at first, the marijuana demand was led by highly politicized youth, some scholars, activists and scholars, of course, marijuana users and growers. And the main frame of this demand was about personal freedom, and so it was about a critique of the moral bias of the war on drugs, because they understood that this war, it was a moral war, and it was taking too many costs to Latin America. This moral bias approach, it wasn't justified by health or by safety. It was a moral problem. This was the main argument, not the only one, of course, but it was the main image attached to the political process. The public debate was very low profile and limited to specific venues. It was very hard to break through the like-minded public, let's say. Why? Because basically mass media was reluctant to bring this subject as a political subject. If you see the mass media, the news, you will always find news related to marijuana in the crime section and not on politics. But also, and perhaps more importantly, even within the Frente Amplio, at first, when Frente Amplio first won the election, mainstream politics were pretty much reluctant to talk about this. In Spanish, is Nueva Agenda de Derechos, new rights agenda, but I think that in English that has another meaning. But they were reluctant about talking of these issues, these social issues, about abortion, about gay rights, about marijuana, these new youth topics. So it was the youth that led this debate and in a way set the agenda. So the output of this first stage was the presentation of a bill that concerned the regulation of cannabis for its consumption, and included basically the legalization of self-cultivation and social cannabis clubs. As you may see in a few seconds, in this first moment, this is a draw about the network, the Reformer Advocacy Coalition network. And as you can see, just my idea is that at least retain that there are few actors involved in the debate in this stage. In this stage, the debate is very low profile. When this law that I just described about the legalization of self-cultivation was about to be, drafted by a ad hoc commission, legislative commission, that, interesting enough, was at first convoked or built to discuss the problem of free-base cocaine in Uruguay, and it was meant to build a law about the compulsory treatment of users, but as a kind of hazardous event, end up building this law. And this law was about to be voted with uncertain conditions about the possible success, but it was supported by a handful of every political parties, not only by Frente Amplio, but also by some youth politicians in the Partido Colorado and Partido Nacional. Confronted by this possibility of legalizing self-cultivation, the executive power in Uruguay, instead of going backwards, decided to double the bet. But the compromise or the commitment to do that was reframing the whole thing not as an emancipatory issue, not about personal freedom, not about this moral bias, but as a public safety problem, a public safety issue. The general context here was pretty much what Eduardo described. Structural difficulty of the progressive governments to handle with security and with delivering public safety politics that were alternative or different than to repression. A growing domestic alarm about coca-based consumption. This is something that is very similar to what happened in Europe, for example. Also an external event that triggered many reforms in Europe about harm reduction policies. And an indirect effect of marijuana as a least worst drug, because the really bad drug that makes everybody go crazy.
If you use just only a couple of minutes more, so yes, we can have some minutes for discussion.
Perfect, of course. And also this regional change in the main public opinion concern. The public opinion concern about crime and about public safety is new in Latin America. And that was also a very important political window. That's why marijuana, the proposal of the executive power moved from the legalization of self-cultivation toward the idea of creating this public monopoly for marijuana commerce. Because if this is a problem of fighting drug traffic and drug traffic violence, the way to do that is commercializing cannabis. But this movement was in a very chaotic way, and at first it was a whole contradictory picture about what they were thinking of doing. Nobody really knew what was going on. Nobody trusted that the government would be available to do that. So the third stage that I will go very fast about this is about building this idea of responsible regulation. This idea was built in cooperation with the campaigns in Washington and Colorado, because this attention shift turning into be the potentially the first country in the world that they legalized marijuana, of course that moved Uruguay to the hot spot. So everybody was willing to cooperate with and to help in this process. So the new idea, this third stage, was leading the process through compromise and negotiation to integrate these two former trends about self-cultivation, first period, and commerce, second period, and trying to reframe this as a part of a bigger plan. Part of a bigger plan of reforming drug policy, and not just about marijuana. So, 1 second. The main challenge now, or that are the consequences of this peculiar political process. One is this tension between how we frame the issue. public safety and personal freedom. And there are constantly ongoing debates about what the user will be allowed to do, about if we talk, if they will have to register, and the kind of incentives that user will have to get involved in legal market. Second, the uncertain political condition. This already, Pedro already talked about this. We will have national elections, and the two opposition candidates already claimed the will to stop this reform. And thirdly, and to finish, the public opinion dynamics. In Uruguay, all the time, most of the public opinion was against this bill. About 60% of the people is still against this measure. So it will be very important to answer this question about if we are going from the repression to regulation, to see how this will really work, and to explore the way that the law is conceived and lived by the users, by the police, by the judicial system, by politicians, etc. Because it's not only about a change in the law, but it's also a change in the mind and the culture of the country, and that is much more slow and difficult than changing laws. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. Now we can open the stage for questions and comments. Could be in both sides, in Uruguay and here. So if you or any of the other speakers, I don't know, Eduardo, if you have an image that you want to share, that you have slides. Okay. I don't know if we have questions here. We have a question here.
Hi, this is a question for, thank you to all of you. This was a very interesting talk, which I appreciate because it seems like Eduardo might be more optimistic than the other presenters in terms of the possibility of regulation. And because of that, I'm going to ask Eduardo a question about his talk, because I thought it was very interesting, because at one point you said, well, this is a very simple issue. It's an economic issue. It's about supply and demand. But then you also suggested that it's easy politically to sell the issue of repressing drug users, right? So it seems to me that there's sort of two. Well, let's see. Which do you think is sort of driving the difficulty of legalizing and regulating drugs? Is it the economic issue that's really most important, or is it the political issue and the fact that politicians capture votes on this?
Can you hear me now? Matias, say yes or no? Yes. All right. Well, there's thanks for the question. That's a great question. There is a degree of simplicity on many aspects of drug policy and many aspects of what we're trying to understand. And that degree of simplicity needs to be understood as it is. I mean, I'm not saying by any means that drug policy in general, the drug problem in general, the drug war in general, prohibition or the steps towards regulation are simple. But I'm saying that often we try to find third parties as responsibles, and we try to we find only the U.S. as the reason why our drug policies are failing, or we look into other countries or our neighboring countries that because they are producing drugs, we have a drug problem, or because our next door neighbor is a big drug user. Let's not forget that Brazil is one of the biggest drug users in the world. We become drug producer or producing countries, or we could become transit countries. What I'm saying is that we need to look into the specifics of what drives demand. And what drives demand is often the simple need that comes from young people to explore new things, and this is how people use drugs for the first time. They're in this exploratory stage, you know. Or often the reason why they use drugs is because spiritual reasons, or because they partake on religious rituals, or because they feel some sort of pressure from peers. And it's not because the evil U.S. is trying to throw drugs into Latin America, so we're all doped and we're not able to function and to have democratic working societies. I mean, that was my point. I think that we need to be extremely rigorous in our affirmations, especially regarding why people use drugs. And I also said in my presentation that a lot of good people use drugs. You know, the World Health Organization, an organization that is often extremely conservative regarding drug policy and their approaches towards drug policy, is saying that only around 7 to 9% of illegal drug users are problematic drug users. The rest are not problematic drug users. I mean, the large chunk of drug users are using drugs either responsible or are adults or are sporadic users. You know, they light up a joint once in a while, every weekend, to go surfing or to read a book. I'm sure that many of you PhD researchers often find a better idea to smoke a joint and read a book and concentrate. Some other people go to parties on the weekend and they decide to use cocaine. I mean, they're recreational users, and so we cannot have a one policy or a one point of view fits all. And that is what I was saying, that often the reason why people use drugs, or even the reason why people sell drugs, is extremely simple. And you also mentioned the political aspects on this debate, and yes, most of the presenters have mentioned that it's easy to conduct public security policies using drug policy as a tool. It's easy to detain people, it's easy to control, it's easy to go into low-income neighbors and raid houses looking for drugs, but at the same time turn that into a good excuse to bring back to jail people that are, you know, that are running away from justice. And it's also easy to go into a house, I don't know, to discover a prostitution ring under the excuse that you're looking for drugs. It's easy to detain a car on the street and search that car just using the excuse that you're looking for drugs. And that's the complexity. I know Matthias turned the microphone off.
Thank you, Eduardo. I have a question. I don't know if there is a question there in Uruguay, but I have a question for Clara. Clara, I'd like to ask you, what do you think will happen if the opposition wins the elections in Uruguay?
It's hard to tell. My intuition is that we did have a qualitative jump here, and it will be very hard to go exactly to the starting point. But for example, probably there won't be any selling of marijuana through pharmacies before the national election. So some parts of the implementation won't be at place. Both political candidates promise to reject the law. So it's an uncertainty.
Okay. Well, I think the idea to have this online conversation is to make them last the minimum as possible. People have less tolerance. So I think I really appreciate your time. I think it's been a wonderful experience, and technology has been on our side. So I want to thank you very much to Eduardo, Clara, Pedro, and Marcela for being with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.